Hello, GRAPA members. Welcome to the 4th edition of our Telecoms Fraud Series. Again, I would like to welcome Louis Khor, who will be joining us today to discuss Telco Vice, the complete 5-day fraud certification program. As usual, Louis, would you please get us started by recapping what we discussed last week?
Happily. So basically what we've been talking about in this series from the beginning is we've been talking about our fraud program, how it got put together, and who GRAPA is and how we do it. We've also talked about our one-day executive briefing, which is basically the first day of our certification that we're going to talk about today, which is about making fraud investment equal fraud protection. We also talked in our last video about our 3-day Telco Vice Quick Start, which is basically certification days 1 to 3, but basically we talked about 2 and 3 because we'd already talked about day 1. Okay, and the Quick Start is really about mastering fraud forensic controls.
So today, as I understand it, we will look at the full certification program. What separates this program from the others is that after successful completion, students will become GRAPA certified telco fraud analysts. Louis, what exactly does this mean?
When I talk about it, what I say is that you want to be able to go back to your telco and say to people, when it comes to fraud, I'm the expert, I'm the professional, here's how I prove it. Not just with a piece of paper that says you've been certified, but with the skills and knowledge that you need really to do this job. Okay? When we say certification, it has to mean something. That's what certification as a telecoms fraud professional is really about, being able to go back and say, I know this stuff, and I have the skills and knowledge to do it. You need to be able to go back from this training class and say that you are the authority on telecoms fraud when it comes to your organizations, and have the credentials to prove it. Okay? And it's about being able to implement and apply a comprehensive 360-degree view of telecoms fraud, about understanding the environment as well as the complexity of all these frauds better than anyone else. A lot of the fraud professionals I meet are masters of their environment. They understand telecoms and how it works better than a lot of people I know, and they understand because they need that understanding in order to understand how complex these frauds are and how to attack them in a way that is comprehensive and useful.
That sounds good, Louis, and I really feel that it falls in line with GRAPA's mission and what we feel embodies the true professional. So let's break out this certification class a little bit more. I know we have already discussed the first 3 days, but let's do a quick overview for anyone new to this program.
Absolutely. It's very easy for people who work in telecoms, not just in fraud, okay, to walk around the telco thinking that everyone knows more than you do about all this stuff, and that somehow you've been left out of the loop, that you're not part of this club where everyone actually knows how all this stuff works. Okay? And what we lead up to when we talk about that is we're saying that all this technical stuff, all this stuff that you've been afraid of, all the stuff that you might not fully understand, that stuff is actually very easy and very trivial. And that's what we actually teach you in a lot of detail throughout most of the days of our training. Okay? But a lot of our training is also focused on the hard part of this job, which is the politics and actually getting stuff done within your telco once you do understand all these technical things. Okay? In terms of the stuff that we've already covered in previous videos, we will be revisiting TVC 101, where we talk about management priorities, governance, and standards. In the certification training, we actually do more than we do in the 3-day. We have additional modules about interviewing witnesses and suspects, as well as dealing with regulators and law enforcement, and 1 or 2 other things. What we talked about last week was TVC 102 and TVC 103, where we talk about fraud forensic controls in the network environment, as well as in the BSS environment. And that's crucial foundational knowledge that is useful to a lot of people, but also a key to understanding the more complicated frauds that we're going to cover in TVC 104 and 105.
So up through 103, we've covered governance, standards, the OSS and the BSS side. So as you alluded to, for TVC 104 and 105, what's left?
Really, what we do when we get to TVC 104 is we're talking about interconnect fraud forensic controls. So we're talking about bypass, we're talking about Symbox, we're talking about settlement, interconnect settlement, partner settlement, international premium rate services, SMS spamming and spoofing, traffic piracy, partner procurement. really looking in detail at the different kinds of frauds and fraud families that occur in the interconnect environment. The ACFE has a definition of high-risk areas for fraud. Okay, there's large amounts of cash out, there's a large amount of personal discretion between the people who are involved, and there's a lack of transparency and understanding of the environment. And when you talk about high-risk areas in that way, that's exactly what interconnect is. Okay, so many times we come to these classes and there are many people who don't really seem to understand how interconnect works, how it functions, and in detail, technically, politically, operationally, how this is supposed to function. So what we do is we take you through it, we help you understand it, and we take what is essentially a high-risk, complex environment that requires a high level of technical and business knowledge, and we turn it into something that's understandable, useful, so that you can actually diagnose and protect against all these frauds that can be very expensive and problematic in that environment. Now that's TVC 104. Okay, TVC 105 is talking about roaming and roaming fraud forensic controls. Okay, so we're dealing with IRSF, International Revenue Share fraud. We're talking about Camel and all the frauds that have been coming on board now that we've moved to Camel for many of us. We're talking about high usage reports and using that both as a credit management tool as well as a fraud management tool. We talk about near real-time data exchange, and again, as credit management as well as fraud management. But we also go into more detail into how roaming works, so that once you can understand that environment, which again is, if you thought interconnect was complex, once you get to roaming, you get to a point where, okay, my head starts to hurt now, so I need to make sense of this stuff. And see, there's a reason why we talk about network and we talk about billing and we talk about credit and all these things early on. Okay, that's all foundational stuff that helps you to get to a point where when you come to roaming, you're not just confused out of your mind. Okay, because with roaming, you need to understand how the tap procedure works, how the wrap procedure works. You need to understand what DCHs are and what they do and how to use them. And we also talk about in roamers, out roamers, and basically understanding the business model technically and operationally, how everything works, so that when you enter the environment and try and look for frauds and protect against them, you know where you're working and how to work with it. Okay, because roaming is one of those environments, very much like interconnect, where the risks are very high, where the frauds are big and very costly. Okay, and what's very troubling is that a lot of fraud analysts tend to view roaming through the credit management lens. They think of it only as credit management. Oh, I deal with high usage reports and I look at those. Okay, but it's not just about that, and it has to be about looking at the environment and saying, I have a comprehensive set of controls around this environment, so I know that when bad things happen, I can react, or I'm protecting against all these things.
Louis, that sounds like an intense week. You've got my head spinning, and I'm just sitting here talking to you about what this class is going to be. So for my benefit, and maybe for some of our listeners too, help me take a step back. What in the big picture are your overall objectives, and what is most important to you that students walk away with?
Really, for me, it goes back to what I said in the beginning about what the objective of the class is. Okay, we want you to be the expert, we want you to be the professional, we want you to have the skills and knowledge to do this stuff. But more importantly, we also want people to go back to be more motivated, to be more confident, and to feel that when you say you're a professional, you mean it, because you know that it's true. Okay? The success stories that we keep hearing from the people who have been through the class, been through the certification, is what they say to us. They stopped doing all the stuff that they were doing that's not actually useful, because there's a lot of momentum in telecoms, and you think, oh yeah, I've been doing this for so long. You stop questioning why you're doing it. Okay? And so many people have come to the class and said, okay, yeah, I stopped doing all this stuff that didn't actually deliver value, that it wasn't, I'm spending all my time doing things that didn't make sense, and I'm spending more time on things that really matter. Okay? And so many people, after going through the class, say to us, okay, I'm going to have to rethink my approach to fraud and how we deal with it. And so many people come to us saying, okay, really what I want to do is make sure that I'm not missing something, that when I do this, as I've been doing for the past 10, 15 years, that I'm not missing something. Because when it comes down to it, no one goes to school learning how to deal with telecoms fraud. Okay, we come in with our own technical backgrounds or finance backgrounds or whatever, we need some means of saying, okay, this is the industry standard and this is what I do. And when I map those things together, am I missing something? Am I doing something I'm not supposed to be doing? And so on. Right? This is a verification and making sure that you are doing things the way you're supposed to do them. But more than that, what gets me happiest is when I hear about, I went back to my job and now I have a motivated team who's excited to do what they do. Because in a way that wasn't true before, I now know what it is that I do and how I should be doing it. Okay? And it also is about giving fraud analysts and fraud professionals the confidence and knowledge to deal with other teams, to work with network, to work with IT, to work with the revenue assurance team, finance, credit, and so on. We've actually had people who come to this class and said to us, oh, now that I've been through this, now that I have this credential, and now that I understand what it means to be a fraud professional, when I was asked to speak to the board, when I was asked to brief them on what we're doing for fraud, I felt as if I was really in a position to do that. I had the confidence to do it, and when I did it, I wasn't shaking in my boots. I really knew what I was talking about, and I could go to them with integrity and say, oh, this is what we're doing, this is right, we should be doing this, and if you can give me more money, I can do more of this.
Well, you're really getting me excited about this course. I know we will be running it multiple times this summer in Cape Town, Chicago, Islamabad, and even Sydney. And I really can't wait to talk to you after those events to get some of your first-hand stories about the experience. I know next week you'll be coming back to talk to us about a special presentation you're doing in Panama, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that as well. For our listeners who would like to view this interview or any of our other prior interviews, you can view them at the Telecom Fraud Library on telecom-fraud.org. And we do hope you'll be back with us next week to join us for the next edition of our fraud series.